Thank you. Well, thanks.
Thank you very much for coming. I will just give a 15-minute presentation on interchange. This is going to be a very lively discussion. I will present the academic point of view on certain experiments and what they led to, and acquaint you and bring you some of the evidence. What is the interchange about? Interchange is a commission that is paid by the issuer to the buyer of the credit card or a debit card. So these are particular things. I'm quite lucky that due to the fact that the new report of BCG was issued last week, and this report points out that there's been a growth of approximately 5.6 to 6%, and quite high indicators as far as Russia is concerned. We have indicated growth of payment using plastic, and so far the forecast for the future in Russia is that Russia will be amongst one of the leaders in the development of this particular trend. And in comparison with other countries, we are in quite a unique situation. Due to certain reasons, we find ourselves in a situation where everything should have spanned out quite well. What is the situation in Russia? Approximately 60+% in the majority of categories are paid by plastic. As far as the comparison with other countries is concerned, use of cash is growing as a share of the GDP. This is one of the graphs that points to this trend. The growth in payments and cash payments is not ceasing due to the fact that the reality in Russia is different from the reality in other countries. The attitude and approach to interchange in the development of payment systems is quite unique. We started at a later date, but we weren't trying to regulate these processes immediately, actually more oriented towards the development of the market. And you will find that the results were quite interesting, and we can draw from certain examples. Let's talk about some of these experiments. I was more interested in the Russian and American systems, and there are a lot of details as far as China is concerned, which differentiate China from other countries. And the regulator usually, in many cases, pointed out that we needed to restrict the interchange fees paid by banks to each other. And there were quite rigorous restrictions in Europe, up to 0.2, 0.3%. It brought actually to the following. We analyzed the situation in Skolkovo together with the Russian Economic School and came to the following conclusion. Regulation is different in different countries. Europe, US, and the US and Australia were building their regulation system in different ways. On the other hand, when we are analyzing particular experiments, and as we are analyzing particular experiments, we come to certain conclusions. I will show you the results slightly later. The European experiment took a longer time. Starting from in 2019, the European Commission Commission has published a report bringing forward the conclusions. When you're regulating something, when you are limiting or restricting the interchange fees of banks, the question arises, what is the balance that you are aiming at? A lot of payment systems experiments are connected with cashback. Well, the European experiments with strict interchange fee restrictions brought about the following. The level of payments was restricted as well, and we see that cash is becoming more popular when we analyze the GDP as share of GDP. You will see a particular graph of using cash in the economy, and it turns out that apart from Sweden, which is brought forward as one of the most interesting examples, the other countries continued using cash, and cash became even more popular. In Russia, as far as these figures are concerned, cash is becoming less popular. The experiment demonstrated that when you restrict market forces, when you use rigorous restrictions as to what banks can do, you actually cut loyalty. For instance, in the UK, this program was totally annihilated, and cash became and is still is one of the leading forms of payment in Germany. On the other hand, when you're thinking of the benefits for retail companies selling products but complaining about the high interchange fee, they actually see that both small and medium-sized enterprise get nothing from it. As for the American example, the representatives in this area produce the particular indicators showing that the system is working quite well. In 2011, the Regulation 2 has become fact, and it restricted interchange fees. On the other hand, it cut it twofold, but for large financial organizations, basically. You have two groups of companies. For some, you restrict the interchange fees. For smaller companies with assets less than $200 million, you say, we're not interested in restricting your activities. So what does this lead to? Banks providing such possibilities to their counterparties need to resolve the situation. You can simply take them off the balance and of the profits. And on the other hand, you can say that you're providing a lot of services, and you have to think on how to cut your loyalty programs. When you start studying the banks which are limited and the banks which aren't, you will see the following picture. Those that have been restricted, the depot accounts are growing. And you can see in point 2 that within a month there's a large increase of 1 to 3% in the servicing of these accounts. In the third point, as you see, you can see the sums on the accounts that need to be kept on balance. The banks, some banks are cutting their loyalty programs and placing the burden on the shoulders of their users, but continue to work in that department. They are expanding and increasing the cost of services. But that was quite an interesting effect because it was, to a certain extent, a natural experiment where the regulator has decided to take a specific action. And when you think, why wasn't it possible to retain the situation, providing for better use of the system? Well, it's quite an understandable story because the regulator usually made its decisions, so to say, under the burden of the public decisions or the decisions of the public organizations. On the one hand, they were, as a result, the imbalance, it was misunderstood and the regulator hadn't noted what was happening because the regulators can actually work with the system. On the other hand, when you are thinking on how to evaluate these costs, you can evaluate them from a different angle. We can say that we're a completely different country. We can do it our own way. And the experiment was first technical, and we were watching it from onshore. We should have paid specific attention to it initially.
And the last story is how uniform that was in the market. It was a very heterogeneous story. In the Russian context, my colleagues started this long ago. They are still studying them. The last dissertation by a colleague of mine who finalized the issue of assessing those losses without an experiment based on a model of general equilibrium. How did he manage to do that? And why do we have some advantage over other researchers? Well, we started studying this earlier, and we actually assessed those equilibrium effects because we worked very actively with the selection of users and companies who provided us with the knowledge about how they respond to regulated interchange. And one of the bits of such a research was a hypothetical experiment. In particular, companies who were asked about what would happen if the interchange is reduced. The banks in this situation said they will cancel loyalty programs. When we asked them what would happen if the retailers will reduce those costs, will you increase the prices slower? And they said the inflation was 4%, we will increase the prices by 3.8 in a situation when you cut our losses on interchange by 3%. And the users will not be affected. How are the United States trying to pass on to a greater pressure on payment systems, which is a market phenomenon because it's all because of the competition? Apple Card, this is obvious. But if you read what Apple is doing from the payment standpoint, well, at least it's obvious to me, maybe not to a lot of other people. We may diverge in our opinions. But actually, they are thinking about how to do all that in-house, how to become a huge international payment company. Let's see how they manage to do it, but the challenge is big. They know a lot about users. The previous session gave you to understand how useful it is to know your user. They can work with information, selecting those our users very wisely, and they don't have any overdraft on a credit card. They actually provide you an opportunity to use an unlimited amount of money. Well, of course it's not unlimited. And if you think about the conclusions that I could make, I think it's very easy. There were a lot of experiments, at least in many countries of the world. They are different in different countries. We know what happens if you try to satisfy all the incentives and all the wishes. My colleagues made an accurate equilibrium model which shows what if. So it's a model that precedes the experiment, and it seems to me that even the research made before that is quite transparent. None of them prove that the current rates need to be reduced 50 times and everybody will win. Like all our attempts to calculate show that is not so. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them as best as I can. Unfortunately, there's no microphone. Colleagues, hi. Please come closer. You'll hear it better and you'll find it more interesting, I hope. We'll not be waiting for anyone. We are behind the schedule. So, come closer. My name is Olga Pogorelova. If you haven't heard about me, I'm responsible for the CRM development for corporate business at VTB Bank, and I would like to talk about a non-standard situation with CRM, and that is going in-house. For me, going in-house looks like a story with 10 little niggers, only reverse of, well, you know, you remember the story that. And with the in-house development, you have first a deficit of developers, you assess the scale of trouble, and you have 30 developers who want to be more flexible, have a better time to market. You have half 100, they start pushing one another, they want to release at different time, and we have a microservice architecture, and we have 100 developers, 100 persons in a team. Why? That's what I'm going to talk about. We have specified 3 key areas for us. Actually, there's many more. That's VTB group, a desire to be flexible and desire to be modern. And that's what I'm going to speak about. The VTB group, well, probably you know, it's very widely represented in over 20 countries of the world. It's about 1 million corporate clients. That's a lot. And there's only one bigger player in the Russian market. And what played a key role in choosing this decision is that we manage the group along the so-called global business line. That means that our client's manager, the key person for whom we make the system, works with clients in Moscow, London, Belarus, and other places, and they see them as the same client, the same group of companies. So we need to provide a convenient environment for interaction with partners and local managers all over the world. On the other hand, our clients talk different languages, and in this system we must support the languages which our clients speak. Apart from that, VTB Group develops dynamically, as different from Sberbank, and Herman Greff mentioned that we are buying banks. And not only buying, we merge them, and because CRM is first and foremost is a client relationship system, it must support this whole story in a very operative manner. So we need to include banks in our process as fast as possible. Continuing on flexibility, of course we do that in an agile manner. Every 2 weeks we produce our releases in order to catch up with the market and turn our ship where the captain wants and where the business leads. And the last key question, why? This is a desire to be modern. Please raise your hands, those who worked in CRM system. Well, quite a lot. In my experience, the attitude of the user to CRM is from neutral to negative. Most people hate CRM systems. More than that, when a person is at his workplace, people have to enter information, but as soon as they leave their offices, they're in a different environment. It's easy to use interfaces, applications, images, smiles, and so on. So we wanted to make our product so modern that the user would be willing to work in it. So we created our internal brand. We called it a corporate business portal. It's not just a CRM system. Yes, functionally it's CRM. It reflects the history of interaction with the client, but it's a reference book of clients. It's an elements of analysis, and it's actually BI from the standpoint of words and so on. Our corporate business portal has a lot of functions, but it's client-centered. And one of the mottos is to build a window into the client's world. When we collect information not only from external, but from internal, from external sources, the system does not only make people enter some information, but it allows it to do so, because it makes clients' lives easier, and all the rounds around this functionality are our teams. So, describing the process, we have 11 teams. Each team has all the key roles, developers, testers, and all work according to Scrum cycle when a product is created in 2 weeks from backlog to product. That is classical, and that's not interesting to you. But we have a fetish, and this fetish are our internal clients, our users. You understand that CRM is an internal system. It doesn't have anything to do with external clients, but we work with internal clients like we would with external. What do you think these guys are doing? Any ideas? Any guesses? No? These guys have just come from an interview with the user and are trying to make a client profile. So a map of working with people, they put all the insights that they have developed during the process. So the system starts from the idea, from the hypothesis, from the cure, to testing all the prototypes and models and usability tests. But it doesn't finish with that. When the function has been already implemented, when it already exists, we have the so-called empiric or heuristic assessment. A team of designers, several persons, look at part of the functionality and assess it heuristically. That is, how intuitive is the system behavior? Does it tell you about mistakes? Is there enough information on the screen to make a decision? And if each element of the functionality is assessed like that, and our product team doesn't only work with technical backlog or with technical log, it also works with the design backlog. But as you understand, 100 persons, lots of teams, each makes its own part of the system, but we would have a patchwork design unless we wanted to make it systemic. So one of the key elements is the design system, which covers colors, fonts, but it also has elements of controls and elements of the system that the designers use make this absolutely homogeneous. Summarizing, I will explain why we started all this. We wanted to be flexible. We were trying to involve users, and most importantly was not just to improve the processes, not just to abide by the KPIs that we set for us to increase conversion, to increase the client base, to optimize the process, and so on. What was important for us is how our users' lives change in the process. I will provide a few examples of how the life of VTB personnel improved. Before, all the information was exclusively within the bank perimeter. You met a client, and then if you have a performance review tomorrow, you must come to the office and enter the information about your interaction with the client. Now you can do that at home from your mobile gadget, from any point, any place in the world. Previously, all the information was in Russian. Apart from VTB being a very big bank, we have branches abroad, like in China, and for the employees of our foreign branches could enter information, we provided instructions for a Russian interface with words "enter here." Now the system is available in Russian and in English. Previously, subdivisions collected information for reports, and it took 2 weeks. Now it takes 5 seconds. We started the CRM system with reporting. We actually made reports, and that was the first thing we did. So we connected a lot of sources of information to the system. We involved the top management, and we connected dashboards. And after that, we started to involve personnel. We are growing. We are changing all the time. We have grand plans. We are working with startups. You can direct your smartphones at my picture, and if you have a Facebook application, you can write to me. We're open for collaboration. Please come, and maybe we can do something together. You will share insights, and we will share ours. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you very much for your presentation. Were there KPIs of the project, and how did you measure them? Lots of them. It depends on the functionality of the system. KPI on the level of users, KPI on cutting the time frames, KPI on the expansion of client base. So yes, there are quite a lot of them. Quite a lot of them. The question on regeneration, well, it depends on where the data or where the lead comes from. Could be partners, sites, and other different sources of leads. We have a particular workflow on how and where these leads are channeled, depending on the experts who are dealing with that. So it's a complex, difficult question. for the lead. For the lead, it's important to be identified properly and contacted on a timely basis. How much time does it take to... Well, I cannot answer that question, basically, but within 24 hours, the whole process takes approximately 24 hours. So you have to, I'll have to clarify that, and I can answer in the interval. Hello, could you tell me what are you writing? How are you writing this program? It's a self-writing Angular .NET. What about PI system? Currently, all the components are open source components. There's nothing embedded or integrated. We've been thinking about that. We've been thinking about embedding the click, but so far it's an open source and it's our own development. Is that all, colleagues? Thank you very much for your attention. I'd like to invite Alexey Buzdalin from Interfax, who is going to tell us about RuData on the digitalization of data on the bond market. Could I have the presentation on screen, please? Thank you. Well, colleagues, thank you for joining me here, and this is actually the last presentation for today. I represent the Interfax group. I'm going to talk about the digitalization of the information structure of the bond market, and the prices, risks, and the criteria of liquidity of debt instruments. The name is quite long, but so as not to lose all our spectators, I'm going to give you a shorter name. This is the experience of digitalization of emptiness. The emptiness, so to say, or the black hole of the market of bonds in Russia. So I'm going to talk about that. So what are we doing? Who are we? We are an Interfax group. We represent an Interfax group, and we've been working on the bond market for a long period of time. We've been present on the market since the 1990s. It used to be called the EFIR project. Now it's the project RuData, working with the National Depository and the MySex. We have united the databases of different information systems, and then we've opened a window for the issuers, and together with NSDA, we started developing the projects on the pricing of bonds circulating on the Russian market, including the debt instruments which are not really popular on the market and which are not priced. But we're doing this for accounting purposes. Within the framework of this project, we have a sub-project, so to say, or a product, which is called RuData Price, the aim and the target of which is to provide the representatives of the market on with the information on pricing. The second subdivision deals with the offering on of instruments to measure risk, and also We are assessing the indicators of liquidity of certain bonds on the market, which is both important for the regulation, the regulatory bodies, and for financial reporting. Also quite necessary for real investors in order to provide them with adequate information on particular bonds. What does our bond market, how can we describe our bond market currently? You can see on this graph which bonds are assessed in accordance with IFRS 13, depending on the hierarchy of information on fair price. If the bonds are valued in accordance with the first level of hierarchy, they are assessed on the information on pricing. The second method is based on particular pricing. The third is doesn't use pricing information at all. So we will see that half of the market is represented by paper which is not priced at all. So this is the key problem that we encounter in digitalizing the market. On the one hand, the members of the market are trying to provide us with some sort of information. On the other hand, it is very difficult to get hold of information from particular reporting due to low activity, low liquidity of the market. Low level of activity actually tells us that if there is pricing, the pricing doesn't give us a full picture, and low liquidity provides us with the information that the market can actually seize. That is why the main idea, the basic topic, is that how we digitalize emptiness or a void, so to say. So in other words, I have to describe the statistics, although there aren't any statistics at all. So what do we do? Well, our first task is to assess and evaluate the fair price of the bonds. Working together with the depository, we have learned to calculate the fair price of bonds which are not actually traded on the market, bonds which are basically outstanding and which do not participate in transactions. We have thought of a particular model. Actually, Pharma French, the Nobel Prize winner of 2013, provided us with a formula. We have adapted the formula to the specific characteristics of the Russian market. In accordance with the formulas provided by European scientists, Z spread, or the yield of bonds, includes the credit risk, the industrial origin, and the factor of Pharma French, which are indices for the dynamics of the market, and we have also included the indices of imputed liquidity based on the information on the structure of the security, which is entered into the database of NSDA. And this is the result of the non-trading statistics and allows us to evaluate and assess the issue. We analyze the portfolio, we identify the issuers, and if the portfolio is not cannot be considered as a liquid portfolio, then neither are the bonds and securities in it. So this is how we digitalize the so-called price void for the securities. The second goal is the second task is how to assess liquidity. In 1998, liquidity was identified as follows: the sensitivity of the price to the volume of the transaction. So the larger the volume, the higher the volume, the more the volume affects the price of the price tag of the transaction, the less liquid is the bond. This is a very simple formula. P0 is the current fair price of the bond, or so to say sales price of the zero volume, and PX is what the bond can be sold for as a lot. So it is described as a coefficient alpha times X, and the coefficient of sensitivity defines or determines the liquidity of a particular security. So if we're dealing with bonds which are actively traded on the exchange, luckily there are some, approximately 15% out of all the issues, the alpha coefficient, the sensitivity, in other words, liquidity, can be calculated in accordance with the exchange market order books. But for the majority of the securities, it's impossible to do. But we managed to find a way to do it. For actively traded securities, in accordance with the market order book, we calculate alpha coefficient, see how it depends, work out on how it depends on how it's connected with imputed liquidity, the indicator of activity, and the volume of issue. We created a regression model, and we've managed to measure the alpha coefficient for every single security, even those that are not traded on the market. This is how we assess the liquidity quantitatively for all the bonds circulating on the Russian market. Moreover, we rate liquidity, breaking all the securities into 7 particular classes, depending on the level of liquidity. And the third point I wanted to talk about is assessing the market risks of bonds that are not priced. So the expected shortfall is measured, and the classical measures of risks presuppose that for the evaluation, for the assessment, you need to get hold of the prices on a daily basis. Otherwise, the standard approach cannot be used. But how do you solve this problem? How do you measure or calculate the market risk of a bond? The portfolio of the bonds we are assessing is substituted by another portfolio using the procedure of mapping. It's substituted by the portfolio of risks. This is done through the McAvey formula. The indices can be computed on a daily basis, and the market risk for an indice can be computed on the basis of daily statistics. In other words, the target of assessing the market risk for bonds which are not traded on the market can be based on the calculation of the risk of a bond, of the portfolio of bond risks. Well, the problem is that there were practically no such indices on the Russian market, and we've managed to create them, to calculate them. I'm not going to talk about the methods of weighing those indices, despite the fact that it's very interesting. But I can say that if you are interested in using these indices, you can take a look at RuData.info and start using them in your calculations. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that there are no simple solutions for digitalization in this area, where you have this void. In order to make something of this void, you have to use very complex mathematical models. In this case, theory saves the day, because theoretical mathematical solutions allow you to do this. And you don't have to invent the wheel, because for the targets that we are setting, all the theoretical basis has already been created, and it's been in existence for about 20 to 30 years. But of course, you have to take the specific development of the Russian market into account, based on the structure of the market, based on the fact which information you can derive from the market. And we actually did a lot of work in that department. That's about all I wanted to say. And if you have any questions, I will be very glad to answer them.
Talking about methodology for assessment, the fair value of the bonds, right now the Nordea pricing center, which we set up together, is still the only accredited price center. It has been accredited by the Bank of Russia about 2 years ago. How often you revalidate your methodology? So you need to validate it from time to time, so that the banks don't have to do it. Well, once again, theoretically, validation must occur once every year. But so far, the first validation has not yet occurred. It is to come by the end of this year. So we need a validation, but we haven't validated yet. So colleagues, thank you for your attention.